Somebody took our gong thing.
Had
And we
nothing
know
hit
not
gong.
where. They're listening now. You had their
Look,
attention.
here,
Yeah, go ahead.
here, we'll do this right.
That's what I'm gonna start doing.
There we go. Well, good morning. Welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Stuart, Florida. Today is Sunday, February 4. My name is Jackie Buckley, and I am your worship associate today. We are a welcoming congregation. We welcome people of all gender identities, ethnicities, ages, and backgrounds. And we welcome all of those who are on YouTube also. To be put on our mailing list or to find out more information about us, please go to our website at tcuuc.org. Note the email link to request our online newsletter. And just a friendly reminder to silence your cell phones if you haven't already. And this is the time we welcome any new people or visitors. And if you're comfortable, we ask that you come to the microphone to introduce yourselves so we can get to know you a little.
I'm going to introduce my shy friend.
No pressure, no pressure.
Harris is visiting me for several weeks from Avon, Connecticut. And you may not hear her directly mentioned from the pulpit from time to time, though you hear Bob mention his late dear friend George, or his former member of Sturgis, and his widow.
Thank you. Welcome, yes. All right. For our announcements, please see the printed order of service that's in your bulletin today, and also the newsletter for details. There are a few things I do want to mention, though. Next Sunday, February 11th, at 10:30 worship service, we will have a very special guest and music leader, composer, guitarist, and singer Jim Scott. His songs are in our UU hymn books and include Gather the Spirit. The service will run until noon. And then on Sunday the 18th, we have another special service presented by our Green Team. This coming Tuesday at Stuart Veterans Memorial Park downtown at noon is our brown bag lunch. And now we do our thank yous. A big thank you to those who are helping with the service today. Jackie Robbins on cello, Judy Bajoris at the piano, and we have special music today by Joe Giannicaro, accompanied by John Morn. We want to thank our greeter, Janet Grote, our ushers, yet to be announced, our tech elf, Karina Poloni, and our tech support, Rachel Valentino. Our hospitality team today is Joanne Leone and Marguerite Gregory. And in the pulpit today is our own Reverend BobMacDonald. And now for our prelude. Thank you, Jackie. We're glad you made it, for sure.
Thank you.
The words for our chalice lighting this morning come from Linda Hart. We kindle a small flame in this darker part of the year, remembering the promise of abundant life and of possible peace. We pause on this day to tell the stories to sing the songs, and to bring more light into the world. Our opening words today come from Heather Rion Starr, a piece she wrote called "Come In From the Wind," which I have condensed. On this day, as with so many Sundays, we come in from the whirling world, the wind, the bright sun, the push and pull of tides and time, the tumult of global news and local stories, the pain we hear of, the demands on our spirits, the do this now culture that we live in. We come into this sanctuary from that windstorm, the rush of speeding drivers on roadways, the rustling silence that fills some of our homes, the vastness of a once busy and perhaps now quieter house. All of this can leave us feeling stirred and unsettled. When we give our attention to what's going on around and beyond us in this throbbing world, we can feel windblown. We need places where we can come and find our grounding once again. Come in from the wind. And now we'll have our first hymn, number 26, Holy, 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 and please stand if you're able. And now for our affirmation. Please join me in reciting the first verse and singing the second. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
The responsive reading is 592 by William Ellery Channing, who's considered one of the founding guiding lights of Unitarianism in New England and in America, The Free Mind, 592. I call that mind free which masters the senses and which recognizes its own reality and greatness, which passes life not in asking what it shall eat or drink, but in hungering, thirsting, and seeking after righteousness. I call that mind free which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith, which opens itself to light whencesoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven. I call that mind free which is not passively framed by outward circumstances and is not the creature of accidental impulse, which discovers everywhere the radiant signatures of the infinite spirit, and in them finds help to its own spiritual enlargement. I call that mind free which protects itself against the usurpations of society and which does not cower to human opinion, which refuses to be the slave or tool of the many or the few, and guards its empire over itself as nobler than the empire of the world. I call that mind free which resists the bondage of habit, which does not mechanically copy the past nor live on its old virtues, but which listens for new and higher monitions of conscience and rejoices to pour itself forth in fresh and higher exertions. I call that mind free which sets no bounds to its love, which wherever they are seen delights in virtue and sympathizes with suffering, which recognizes in all human beings the image of God and the rights of God's children, and offers itself up a willing sacrifice to the cause of humankind. I call that mind free which has cast off all fear but that of wrongdoing, and which no menace or peril can enthrall, which is calm in the midst of tumults and possesses itself though all else be lost. Channing charted quite a course for us to follow. And now our time of joys, concerns, sorrows, and I'm hoping to begin with a picture on the wall. Not of me. Yes, this is a couple. This is a couple that left here not long ago, Deb Harris and Francisco Perez. They were married last week in Connecticut. And she tells me they may do a redo when they're back here visiting in August. We can hope so. But here they are on their way to what couples do often right after they get married. We'll leave it with that, how we miss them and love them. And next are their children playing outside to give the parents a moment of privacy and quiet inside. Now, is that clip going to move or not? We'll see. These are their 4 children playing outside in the snow. Now, you remember playing outside in the snow. You probably miss it. But more than likely you do not. Come back, children in the snow.
I don't know, I won't play on this computer, but I'll try to get it to play at the end of the service.
Well, could you just lie down on the carpet here and roll around and show us? No, not to worry. We got the picture. We got the picture. So anyway, it was wonderful to hear from them, and she does say that she's going to be back and will visit when she is, and they hope to be here in August, and we can do a redo, and that would be fun. We wish them the best. I think they're watching. They're supposed to be watching. Of course, like my children out there, I never know. But who else has something of joy or sorrow to share? Did you move it? Yeah, you moved one. Okay.
Deb and Francisco, tears of joy.
Anyone? All right. Should we move, let's see, for Gaza, for Ukraine, for California? California is not at war, but you know it's waiting for
Mother Nature's.
a horrendous flooding to come. So just move a few stones, and those places are in the news and in our minds and hearts. Now, the meditation is from an ancient, in the 300s, I believe, I call that ancient, named Eusebius in the back of our hymnal. Eusebius, if it's the same Eusebius I know about, became the first church historian who wrote about the first 300 years. He's written up as a Greek Palestinian who lived in Caesarea, which is now part of the state of Israel. But we don't often read people from the first 300 years of Christianity. But this is Eusebius in the back of the hymnal reading 521. I'm just going to read it as our pastoral meditation. May I be no one's enemy, and may I be the friend of that which is eternal and abides. May I wish for every person's happiness and envy none. May I never rejoice in the ill fortune of one who has wronged me. May I, to the extent of my power, give needful help to all who are in want. May I never fail a friend. May I respect myself. May I always keep tame that which rages within me. May I accustom myself to be gentle and never be angry with others because of circumstances. May I know good people and follow in their footsteps. Eusebius. And now moments of silence. Spirit of Life is hymn 123. We remain seated, we hum, we sing. And now, as you know, every week we say we hope you experience generosity here. And to keep going, we must invite your generosity. And now 2 ushers will materialize. Who will... And now we have some special music with John and Joe, or Joe and John.
First, a big shout out to John, who's done 90% of the work for this endeavor. Pretty amazing guy to work with. And just briefly, this song is pretty old, and it's been heard all over the world, and it's about reflection. Try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were a tender and callow fellow or lady. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Try to remember when life was so tender that no one wept except the willow. Try to remember when life was so tender that dreams were kept beside your pillow. Try to remember when life was so tender that love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, without a hurt, the heart is hollow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember the fire of September that made us mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow.
Thank you, guys. The sermon, you asked. Responses from righteousness to a Palestinian state. This may have to be followed by another sermon titled something like, there really is a point to that, be careful what you ask for. But again, before the sermon, a couple of announcements, one I've already given you. I don't know if I've mentioned recently that I've been told that I've been hacked, and some of you have gotten emails not from me, often asking for something, often asking for help or money. You know that I only ever ask for money from up here. You all know that. Yes. So what I'm going to have to do is ask people not to respond to anything that you aren't expecting from me. If you're expecting an email from me, then you would maybe respond to that, but otherwise don't. And I'm going to have to use the phone more than I've been lately because emails and texts are so convenient. Or that's that. And now, on next week, on the topic of asking for money, not really on that topic, but we're really privileged next week to have this guest who's coming, and he's coming because he has two friends named Robbins. So they have been the entree for him to know that we're here and he wants to be here playing for us. So we need to contribute to his visit. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is bring something extra that you'll put in the offering plate. I've been told by our leaders, I can't just say whatever offering we take that day, we can just give to a guest because we have to keep going here. But I can say to you, please plan to bring a little extra next week. And after the service today, I'll put these on the back. And whatever you put in these next week, we'll collect and we'll go to Jim Scott. It won't be as much as we would like, but it will be what we can give. So please plan to give, and maybe don't put it in until after the service, because I think you might be moved to give more after you've heard him. So that's all about that. I'm really grateful to Sandy and Jackie Robbins for getting him here. And when he first started contacting me that he was willing and ready, I didn't really think we could do it because I knew we couldn't afford him. And I just didn't think we could do it. And what he wanted to do was the service and then a lunch and then a concert in the early afternoon. I didn't think we could do that. So what I've told him, and what you might expect besides what I've already said, is that I've told him he can have from 10:30 till 12. Now, some of you might have to leave, but once you hear him, you might not want to leave. So I've told him that he'll have an hour and a half. We'll have refreshments after, and that'll be our time with him. But if you look up him on YouTube and listen to him, you'll hear that he's quite a special guest, and it's really our privilege to have him. So that's why I've said, if you know any people that really like music, and you all do, I do, invite them. They might be glad that you did. Next Sunday at 10:30, our service. Now, the first question I got was, righteousness sounds like a good thing. Self-righteousness, a bad thing. Self-righteousness in the Judeo-Christian tradition was always a kind of cluster concept of attributes of deity. Attributes of deity. Holiness, holy, holy, holy. Goodness, rightness, becoming loving kindness, fidelity, in the Jewish Hebrew word is hesed, fidelity, justice, and then compassion, all applied to the deity. Deity evolved. Now that's a heretical thought, but in fact, even in the scriptures, deity evolved from judging parent, thou shalt and thou shalt not, sounding like maybe a parent we heard or were, because I said so, evolving from that to kindness and justice for all. I've mentioned many times, and will go on mentioning, this Karen Armstrong, historian of religions, claims that a number of religions discovered that compassion was what religion was about. Compassion, what deity was about and what religion was about. And she said a number of religions around the world discovered that around 700 BCE, almost 3,000 years ago. And you've heard me say, if they discovered that, why haven't they shown it better? But anyway, that's another sermon. So I think deity started out kind of heavy-handed. I remember my parents fighting, who died and made you the deity? Something like that. I used to like that image at the end of Dragnet. That was the first crime show I got addicted to, Dragnet. You remember Joe Friday and his yes man sidekick? The image at the end was a rock like Gibraltar, and that iron muscled hand and arm and hammer etching something to last. To me, that was kind of an image of deity. Now, self-righteousness I would call a mental disease caught by those who think they have somehow merged with deity, holier than thou. That comes to mind because I learned a long time ago about a book, maybe you've heard about it, called The Three Christs of Ypsilanti. Ypsilanti is a well-known psychiatric hospital in Michigan. It was. I don't know if it's still there. But the author, I think I wrote his name down, Milton Rokesh, discovered there were three psychotics in that hospital who all thought they were Jesus Christ, and they got together and parceled out territory of their power. So even people that far gone were able to have rational moments, rationing or dividing up the territory to be Jesus Christ in that mental hospital. The same author had found that two women in a mental hospital, I don't think that one, but another one, thought they were Mary, mother of Jesus. Two women thought they were Mary, mother of Jesus. And they had decided in a rational moment that if another woman appeared and thought she was the mother of Jesus, they were going to tell her she had to go somewhere else. That role was already covered. Anyway, you don't have to go to a mental hospital to be around self-righteousness or people who think they've merged with deity. You know, there's kind of a warning sign when you're around it because you're looking for the exit and you're watching your watch more than you usually do. But we've all been in the presence of self-righteousness, and we don't want to be in that presence very often. In 2003, at my last assignment in Connecticut, the Bristol, Connecticut church, Bristol, near Hartford, I got to organize a community forum on the Second Iraq War, 2003. I had learned that a prominent ethicist from a prominent seminary, Union Theological in New York City. Now, Truman, did you know Roger Shin? Yeah. Yeah. Show off. So he had retired in Western Connecticut, and I asked him to come and present his take on that war, American policy in that war. Did that policy jingle in your brain a couple days ago when you heard that we had done airstrikes against our ally, you-know-who, Iraq? All right, I'm sorry. The devil made me bring that up. That's another topic. Anyway, who was I talking about? Roger Shin. He started off commending President G.W. Bush for his personal victory over alcohol. He went on to fault him for naming the axis of evil when he called North Korea, Iran, and Iraq the axis of evil. Shin said that the axis of evil spins in all of us, and we all have choices to turn in its direction or away from its direction. Once you name yourself, once you name anybody else as wholly evil, only evil, you delude yourself, because when you do that, you know you're not saying you have a toe in that pool too, and you're more dangerous than you know. That was kind of the gist of his report to us. Next question. Why aren't we more diverse? We here, TCUUC, why don't we have more people of color, more people of gender difference? I'm assuming that's the meaning of the question. I remember hearing in the 70s that in about 50 or 60 years, America would have a Caucasian minority, and people of color would comprise the majority of Americans. What I didn't hear or get was that that meant a future we should all fear, and that some white people would do anything to prevent that from happening. Unitarian Universalism celebrates diversity of race, gender, and ethnicity. We have learned to fear those who fear diversity. I don't know why more LGBTQ plus people don't at least try us. I'd like your take on that, but not right now. What is a soul? S-O-U-L. What is a soul? I think soul is a metaphor about what we are deep down. It is a metaphor for what we yearn to be. It's picture talk for the package that began when we did and ends when we do. The religions that most of us began in, and Unitarianism and Universalism began in, both of those denominations, when they were two separate, Both were kind of heretical Christian movements in their beginning. Both expressed a revolt and disgust with Calvinism. Calvinism, which somehow glorified the deity by saying people were born for heaven or for hell. Calvinism was popular in the Christian denominations of the American colonies and early states. If you're familiar with Forrest Church, we have 1 or 2 copies of his book, So Help Us God. I think that's the title. So Help Us God. He chronicles the history of the colonies and the early religions that were prominent there. And it just stuck in my brain that he mentioned that Universalism, which is probably a Christian denomination we hadn't heard of until it yoked with the other U and came about in the 60s, that Universalism was the 7th most popular denomination in the colonies, the 7th. So that might not seem like a big denomination, but it was pretty well known back then. Anyhow, the Christian churches that we started out in and the U's started out in were rooted in the Mediterranean world. Soul, I learned in college and seminary, soul was an early Greek idea for your innermost being, who you were deep down. Talk about its afterlife, the afterlife of the soul, was a way of influencing what was important to you in this life. But the early Greek idea of soul made soul the higher part of you and separate from your physical body, the lower part of you, with aspects of prison and testing. So soul was a Greek idea, and the Hebraic idea was spirit. So we learned that the religions, Judaism and Jesus and Christianity, didn't use soul picture talk at first, but rather spirit talk. You asked. What appealed to you about the ministry? Why did you want to be a minister? My family in Troy, New York was pretty poor and dysfunctional, largely due to alcohol. We were so lucky to have a deeply devoted mother. I can't say how fortunate we were. Single with 2 little boys when she was 22. Can you imagine? Me and my 3-year older brother, she was 22. She did learn to drop us off at a nearby Sunday school when we were living with her parents in North Troy in our early years. She did that to give her parents and herself a break. We later understood that. My brother and I started going to the youth group in downtown Troy. They were very welcoming and affirming. One leader there was the organist, a black man and high school Latin teacher. He called us frater, brother, from the time he met us. Their welcome and affirmation was a big influence. Before I got out of high school, I knew I wanted to become a minister. I learned about a program in which Methodist bishops spoke of unhealthy motivations to become a minister. And I was curious. I didn't get to go to their conference, but I found out about it. Unhealthy motivations for becoming a minister. One was troubled relations with one's father. That might have been part of me, but I couldn't relate to it at the time. I still can't really. Another was guilt over puberty's arrival and new feelings to deal with. I've mentioned that our youth group tried to help us through that ordeal called puberty. The minister took the boys, and the wonderful nurse woman counselor took the girls, separate workshops, a little RE sex ed. The only thing I remember him telling us, the boys, was that sex meant we boys had a tiger in our tank, and our mission in life was to keep it caged. All in all, the welcome and affirmation of that church of elderly folks meant the direction life would take for me and for my brother, who became a really active leader in that congregation. What gets you up in the morning, and why do you stay up? Three answers come to mind, all to do with nature. First, I have a cat. Cats will park nearby and watch for some stirring in your eyes. And once they detect you are awake, they remind you why you exist. That thing about dogs having owners and cats having staff, there's a bit of truth to that. Secondly, I believe in atrophy and entropy. Are they related? I don't know that they are, but I do believe in them. I think Dick Van Dyke at 90 titled his autobiography, Keep Moving. Now, that's a reason to get out of bed. The third matter has to do with nature, but I'm just going to pass on that. What gets me going in the morning, as soon as coffee has worked, is tuning into news I trust and care about. The BBC and the New York Times cover places I fear for and care about. I care about the options our grands will have. Like the Arthur Miller play, they are all our grands. All right, now for two corkers I'll end on. Palestine and Ukraine. I sense a possible trap here, but what the heck, fools rush in. And I don't need forensics files to tell me that the person who wrote Palestine also wrote Ukraine, because they have the same I formation, the letter I. So Palestine, why not the two-state solution? From before World War I, the world powers and empires tried to settle the Middle East without much regard for the peoples of the Middle East. As I looked into this a little bit for today, I was reminded of the bigness and the prominence and the death of the Ottoman Empire. Now, that happened before the time of anybody here, even Phyllis. I'm not picking on you, Phyllis, I'm really not. You know, the end of the Ottoman Empire comprised the whole Middle East pretty much, Eastern Europe, North Africa, and for 5 centuries or more, it was strengthened and weakened. By its last century, the 1800s, it was called the sick man of Europe. The sick man of Europe. It was so poorly organized, finances were so bad, and it was in a long hospice state, the Ottoman Empire. When it finally succumbed in World War I, it joined the Central Powers. The Central Powers were called the Axis powers in World War II, but the Ottomans joined Germany and Austria and were defeated. and the Ottoman Empire died and was parceled out. It became Britain and France's job to try to parcel it in some way, because they were world empires then. Trade and trade routes were really all that mattered. And the backwardness of the people, because the Ottoman Empire had never emphasized education, just continued to what we see today, really. Trade and trade routes were all that mattered. So when the newly formed UN, after World War II, okayed a Jewish homeland, little or no thought was given to people who were living on that land and were therefore displaced and aggrieved for what was taken from them. Jews who survived the hate and slaughter were owed a homeland by the victors and the vanquished. The largest number of Jews, I believe, came from Russia and East Europe, where anti-Semitism was condoned by church, by state and church, certainly in Russia. Israel thrived, and Palestinians were partitioned, quarantined for their grievances to fester. How long did we hear, why didn't the Arabs take care of their own? Except for Jordan, Arabs didn't feel about Palestinians the way Slavic Eastern Europeans felt about Slavic Ukrainian refugees. On my first archaeology dig in Israel, I think it was the early 90s, we were spooning dirt on an Israeli site not far from the West Bank. We were basically spooning it because we weren't allowed to dig it. If we did digging, we could break something. If we spooned it, we were more careful. It basically amounted to that. We saw nice-looking construction in the distance and asked who was building there. And we were told it was Jewish settlers on Palestinian land. Now, we all know today about Jewish settlers on Palestinian land. The world has condemned that settler activity, and now there is talk of Jewish settlers building on the tiny land rubble named Gaza. The person I follow pretty carefully and closely is a Jewish man, author, op-ed guy, Thomas Friedman. He thinks the only answer is the two-state solution, and he writes out pretty credibly why. The horror of October 7 is not explained away as anything but hatred and extreme acts. But whenever Israeli Jews and Arab neighbors go to war, there is usually a 10-to-1 kill ratio, 10 times more Palestinians, and that is true now. And only wealthy Arab states and the West can rebuild Gaza. And only wealthy Arab states and the West can start protecting Israel and the Palestinian country from each other and make both see there is no other alternative to death and fear. Now, you read in the news, and I read in the news, that Israel wants to have more relationship with those states around, what are they called? Well, they're Arabian states like UAE. They want to do business, they want to have trade and have foreign relations. But the holdup now is that the Palestinians have got to be better treated than they have been by the world. So there has to be a two-state solution. How can it be anything else? My 2 cents worth. And to say it's worth more, I think is overrated. Ukraine. I definitely sense a trap here. Why does Russia think it needs Ukraine? Russia is a proud nation. Russia is a proud nation with a great cultural history, music and literature. 1989 was a blow to Russia's standing in the world. When the Russian SSRs could break away, they did. Now, historically, I won't go into this, I've only read about it recently, both Hitler and Stalin planned the plunder of Ukraine to take the breadbasket and the oil for their respective countries. Hitler and Stalin planned that plunder. When Putin could seize Crimea, he did. There were many Russian estates and beaches there. It was their Florida, Crimea. The war in Ukraine seems like a Russian attempt for a glory that was Rome or Moscow. I think it was the Deputy Foreign Minister of Sweden last week who said eloquently, Ukraine is fighting a war for us, meaning the EU. Ukraine is fighting a war for us. The billions in aid are the least we can do. Now, there is disagreement in the West, in the US, and in TCUUC about how long and how much we can support Ukraine. But I've stated my thoughts, and I'd be happy to hear yours. And I'm thinking, I've raised so many things here that you might well have thoughts on and disagreements with. If you send me such, I will put together a statement, run it by you first, and then put it in the update so that not just my voice gets heard on these topics, but you can tell me what righteousness really is, or you can tell me, you know, what other things really mean to you, and I'll express to the congregation, here are the thoughts of others. And if you tell me to add your name, I will, but if you don't want me to, I won't. But I really like us to have conversation and be able to say we can agree to disagree. So I hope you'll keep asking, and I hope your questions will get easier. But I don't really hope that. Our closing hymn, I don't want you to think I picked with you in mind. 313, oh, what a piece of work are we. 313, I don't know if we know this. I'm asking our musicians to play the verse through once, and then we'll stand, if able, if willing, and sing. Oh, what a piece of work are we.
Number 313.
Let's stand and give it our best. wonderful piece of work. As the chalice is extinguished, I'm going to give the last words to the William Ellery Channing that we all read together, his last thoughts here. I call that mind free, which has cast off all fear but that of wrongdoing, and which no menace or peril can enthrall, which is calm in the midst of tumults and possesses itself, though all else be lost. Channing.
This is hot. This is a saraband by Johann Sebastian Bach, and it's from the C major suite, which is a wonderful key, and it contains all of the elements of humanity that Reverend Bob talked about today. It's complicated.